episode 47 of Strange Brow Radio. I'm your host, Tobe Johnson, and today's guest is Zelia Edgar of JustAnotherTinfoilHat.com, a site dedicated to all things unusual, perfect for our discussion today. And Zelia and I go down a road. Well, we go to a place where there was a murder, and a white lodge and a black lodge, and a midget. We're going to the world of Twin Peaks, because I think it's important, and I'll tell you why. But first, our sponsor, Feral by Aaron at Etsy.com. That's E-R-Y-N. Go on to Etsy. Time is running short. Whatever you celebrate, it's the holiday season, and you need to look at the drums, the rattles, the smudge fans, these alchemy sound devices. Museum quality, I'm not kidding. It's a sale every day around here, so get it while it's getting good at the shop at Feral by Aaron at Etsy.com. All right, next up, Zelia Edgar. I'll tell you more about her in a moment. We'll be right back. All right, our guest today is Zelia Edgar of JustAnotherTinfoilHat.com. And as I previously mentioned, she talks about all things strange and unusual and almost has a photographic memory, extremely well-read researcher. And it was a privilege to talk to her. But we had to go someplace, and we had to go to the world of Twin Peaks. I have been looking for someone, a compatriot, that loved this show, but also used a TV show as a research tool. And I got to tell you that that's exactly what I've been privately doing. Of course, the tagline at the end here is in reference to a particular lyric sung out of the show. I will see you in the trees. And it is been a wealth of knowledge. Living in the Pacific Northwest, this show takes place in the Pacific Northwest. In fact, only about 2 hours from my back door. And within this world, created primarily by David Lynch and his use of transcendental meditation and the writer, Mark Frost, there was, well, a mystery afoot. Not only a mystery, but a Sherlock Holmes type character played by Dale Cooper, our lead hero throughout the show. But within the premise of a murder and a hero, there is all of this incredible symbolism. So we are going to talk about the symbolism as a substance in which maybe something more was going on than imagination. I believe that totally to be true. So this is for the fan and maybe the new recruits out there. So without further ado, I take you into the world of Twin Peaks, and I do it with our guest, Zelia Edgar. Are we in communication, Zelia?
Yep, here I am.
There she is. Okay. With a name like that, just another tinfoil hat, you're a perfect guest for the show. And so here we are. And I thank you for coming on. How are you today?
Oh, I'm really good, thank you. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, so you've got a lot to share just based upon what I've learned from listening to a couple interviews you've been on, checking out your YouTube page. And you are an artist too. You're a verbal artist. You're also very creative with the digital medium. And you look at your YouTube videos as kind of like a paint palette too. You're very good at production value. So I imagine you think about those kind of things as being, effective delivery methods when talking about the subject matters you care about, the paranormal, the occult, supernatural things like the Mothman prophecy. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Boy, well, I guess I've always had an interest in kind of weirder stuff, which I guess the paranormal is considered weirder, I suppose. And yeah, I've been just interested in it forever. And then when I was still pretty young, like 8 or 9, I really started studying it, and the rest is kind of history. So I started in a very kind of, flesh and blood cryptozoological aspect, then kind of moved into UFOs and ghosts and all that stuff. And when I was 17, I read the Mothman Prophecies, and that just entirely changed my outlook on all of this. So currently, my focus is really on cases that are kind of more high strangeness, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
blur the lines between these different, what we perceive as different fields of investigation. So, kind of in hopes of finding some sort of unified field theory for the
Mm-hmm.
paranormal.
Now, did you grow up with anything that brought you to this here? I mean, one of the ideas, of course, is when you're looking into something, it's looking into you. Did you have experiences, or did your family have experiences which brought you here?
See, that's always kind of a weird question because when I think about it, yeah, I guess my family and then myself personally, we've all had experiences with things that I can't explain that would you would determine to be paranormal experiences. But the weird thing is that I never really feel like that's what drove me into this. Um, and actually, when I think about it, you know, it almost like you just think, oh, okay, yeah, sure. My grandma lived in a haunted house for a while. People had experiences there. I've seen several different UFOs, things that you would call UFOs. But it really doesn't seem that weird until you take a step back and see, okay, yeah, that's actually quite a few instances where I've experienced something or someone I know has experienced something.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I wouldn't say anything in particular really drove me to this unless maybe it did and I just, don't realize it.
Right. Well, if you go to her YouTube site, which everyone should subscribe to her YouTube site, Just Another Tinfoil Hat, you have an episode on there, and our logo and moniker is the Pineal Sasquatch profile on our radio show here. So we believe there is a conundrum with just the physical answer behind Sasquatch. You have a
Oh,
video
yeah.
on there called Bigfoot or Sasquatch and green font. And you mentioned that
Mhm.
your mother, one of her first questions to newcomers is, what do they think of the Patterson Gimlin film? That's a pretty interesting question just to ask at the dinner table. Is that something that she does just to see, what the manner of metal is to the new guest? Or that's an interesting thing just to ask.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because to me it's just totally normal, but she actually, definitely was an influence when I first started getting into this stuff. She was like, "Oh, well, look at this, it's Bigfoot," and she, like,
Hmm.
thought it was really interesting. And, yeah, so it's just kind of normal for me, but, um, yeah, no, it's interesting to see the responses you get. Most people, it's like, "What's that?"
Right.
You know? And so then, of course, okay, you break out the laptop, "Well, this is it." And this
Right.
is all the reasons why it has to be footage of something, real. As to what real
Hmm.
exactly means, of course, that's kind of another question.
Hmm.
And then every now and again, you'll get people, oh, that was disproven, and then it's, well, actually, no, it wasn't. So, um, but yeah, no, she kind of unofficially researches this stuff too. But yeah,
Now, when someone disagrees with her, does she just let it go, or does she hold her own and try to sell them on the proof?
well, I don't know how much you're into astrology, but she's like a triple Sagittarius, so she kind of sticks to her guns.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. And so do you.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where I do recognize because again, my thing is, if I ever meet someone new, eventually at some point in the conversation, it's have you ever seen a UFO?
Hmm.
So or a ghost or anything like that, just because like this interest in the paranormal is a big part of my life. And it's almost a disclaimer like, hey, you're getting to know me. I like this stuff. So yeah, I do too, I would say. And again, too, it is interesting to see the kind of mixed responses you get because a lot of people I've met too, it's like, oh yeah, I had this one thing, I don't know what it was, or,
Hmm.
I don't believe in this stuff, but there was this one thing. And then, of course, you'll get a lot of people who kind of just laugh it off. And I understand that all of this is considered more fringe, but,
Hmm.
I think that's part of what's exciting is kind of bringing it to the mainstream.
Well, yeah, and you would agree that if you sit around long enough, everybody generally has a story to tell. They may not know it, they may not remember it, but eventually, if you sit in that room, you will hear an encounter and an account of some kind.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I do feel like it's to the point where more people than, not actually have had an experience of some sort with something that they can't explain.
Hmm. Okay. So you are an active investigator. at this point, and you are looking into cases near and dear. What state are you out of, by the way?
Wisconsin.
I thought I heard of Wisconsin. Okay, gotcha. All right. I've got a couple
Definitely a weird
friends
state.
from Wisconsin, and there's some stuff
Yep.
going on in Wisconsin. You've got a lot of water around you, a lot of habitat for things like Bigfoot. Do you follow up on any active cases in your own backyard?
I try to kind of keep a lookout. Currently, I'm really on the research angle of things, but I'm trying to move into more, active investigation.
Hmm.
I was affiliated. I was a field investigator with MUFON for a while, so I did, the typical calling up witnesses, talking about UFO sightings.
Hmm.
So, and that was cool. But yeah, definitely, I want to start getting into like the more active, like investigating role coming up
Now, did
here.
you find any marriage between a UFO sighting and some Bigfoot sightings?
I do definitely see that pattern in my research. I
Hmm.
never dealt with any cases personally, though. I did hear it was one of those things that you always kind of heard about, kind of on the outside of
Hmm.
what I was investigating. So I know there were a few reports that seemed to tie Bigfoot and UFOs or other cryptids and UFOs, but unfortunately, I never was given the case. So
Okay. Right. Are there a lot of cases out that way as far as UFOs are concerned? Was your day packed if you would have so allowed it with phone calls to people seeing shiny objects in the sky?
it really depended just on the week. It was weird. You'd go through a couple weeks with like pretty much nothing. And then all of a sudden it would be like 2 or 3 days with like 4 reports. So, I do Wisconsin is like fairly active, as far as all of this weirdness though, so I think we are a little bit higher on the list for like UFO sightings and stuff like that. And the proximity of the Great Lakes definitely is, I feel,
Mm.
a reason for that.
Well, okay, let's go there. Why?
UFOs are often tied to bodies of water. I'm a big fan of Ivan T. Sanderson, and his book Invisible Residence really kind of was one of the forerunners to look into that connection. Um, it's kind of a subset of the UFO phenomena of USOs or unidentified submerged objects. And it's really interesting once you get into the possible like crypto-terrestrial theory that there are potentially, and again, this is all potential. I mean, I'm not staking a claim and belief on any one of them just because the truth is I don't know. But as far as crypto-terrestrials are concerned, the idea, the notion that we might share this planet with other advanced races or species that we have really limited knowledge of. Sanderson pointed out that most likely they would exist probably underwater. And it's really interesting when you start looking into these UFO sightings where there's a flying saucer, for lack of a better term, in the sky that drops right into a lake or the ocean or, even rivers. So there is definitely a connection there, I would say.
The relationship between Ivan T. Sanderson and John Keel, is that an established communication? Do you know if they were working on projects together?
Oh yeah, they were definitely very close friends and
Mm,
colleagues, I would say. It's interesting when you read their works from around the same time because Keel was definitely going into the super spectrum idea and the ultra terrestrials, the notion that there are things just outside of our current electromagnetic spectrum.
mhm.
And Ivan T. Sanderson, I think, came around to that every now and again, but he was, as a biologist, he was really interested in the cryptoterrestrials and the possibility of all of that sort of thing. So, but yeah,
Right.
that connection was definitely there, and they collaborated a lot. I know there's, like, tons of correspondence between them. It's neat. You just go through either one of their books, and usually a couple times the other one is mentioned. It's really cool.
Oh, wow. Do you know if there's any existing video of those 2 or film of those 2, together?
That I'm not sure about.
Yeah.
I know that they both investigated Flatwoods, but I'm not sure if it was, like, at the same time or not. I know
Mm,
there's some really, really great audio of Ivan T. Sanderson talking to the witnesses,
mhm.
of the Flatwoods Monster, but I'm not sure if Keel was there at the same time or not.
Right. Um, the Flatwoods Monster, remind people about that case. I know that there was a recent documentary from Small Town Monsters on it, but the rest of the audience doesn't really know, so clue people in on what that is.
Okay, sure. Yeah, the Flatwoods Monster, it's a really interesting case because And again, my thing kind of is like outlier cases, ones that are really weird. And my absolute favorite thing is when a classic kind of ends up being more of an outlier. And I believe that's the case with the Flatwoods Monster. It's really well known in pop culture. It was like this robotic sort of entity, about 6 feet tall, with the Ace of Spades type hood or helmet around it that was observed in Flatwoods in, I should have the year memorized, but I can't remember exactly what it was right now. And it was observed by seven to eight people, all at the same time in conjunction with a UFO sighting. And it's just a really interesting case because of the fact that it was described as being metallic or robotic in nature. And the weirdest thing about this is that that's exactly what we should be expecting from UFOs. If they are indeed extraterrestrials from another planet,
Mhm.
the very first thing we should expect would be kind of rovers or drones or robots or things like that.
Mhm.
When usually when people see UFO occupants, they appear to be biological and they seem to often have no type of protective covering or hazmat suit or space suit or anything like that. That's a whole kit and caboodle of other stuff that you could get into with that. But with the Flatwoods Monster, it is exactly what should be anticipated in the form of this robotic metallic entity. So, yeah, and
Wow.
that was too. After that, there were tons of sightings in the area of other UFOs. Other people saw like this lizard sort of creature that actually stalled their car. The men in black showed up to one of the key witnesses' households after the fact. It was amazing. There was also
Well, wait a
a
second,
military
Zelia. Let's go
investigation
back
too.
to this the lizard thing stalling out
Mhm.
someone's car. This is something that comes up. One of the first witnesses I talked to regarding Sasquatch behavior was an author by the name Henry Franzoni that said a Sasquatch blew out his starter, which didn't seem like a
Yeah,
physical attribute of an ultra terrestrial or a crypto terrestrial, whatever we're going to call this.
yeah.
Do you know the details surrounding this lizard hurting a car?
Yeah. It was, a tall humanoid, like sightings of the lizard man, and I know it's kind of a silly name, but those, come up every now and again, and they are, closely tied to people claiming sightings of reptilians with UFO encounters. And so I think in the week that followed the big Flatwoods Monster sighting, a couple was driving and their car shorted out, and nearby there was this humanoid reptilian lizard man entity. And yeah, you'll see this a lot too. I know there's a really famous case from Marlington, West Virginia, that was covered in Keel's book, Strange Creatures from Time and Space,
Hmm.
where this guy's car stalled and he looked to the side of the road and saw a Bigfoot. And he was actually following some people, so they realized that, he was no longer following them. Came around to see what happened. The Bigfoot ran away. His car started up, continues on his way. And some miles down the road, his car shorts out again. He looks to the side of the road and there's the Bigfoot again. So you'll see this time and time again,
Hmm.
with cryptids, and then of course, UFOs and ghosts. For some reason, we can accept that there are electromagnetic field disturbances involved with them.
Hmm.
But when it comes to cryptids, it's a little bit harder for people to accept. I feel, even within the field of the
Hmm.
paranormal.
So,
But there's a definite
what do
connection.
you think this connection is between EMF disturbances and cryptids? What do you think this is? Just by a, however they have to exist within this plane here. Is it part of the disturbance of the energy scattering out? How do you explain it?
I do feel like it might be like similar to how, okay, ghosts, and this is all tied in with Keel's theory of the ultra terrestrials and the super spectrum. The idea is that they need some sort of electrical charge to manifest in this plane of existence. And if we take that a step further to say that they exist just outside of our visible spectrum of light, maybe they need this charge to, appear or manifest in this spectrum of light. And it may be the exact same manner with cryptids. It could be that, some or all of them exist just slightly outside the boundaries of what is considered our spectrum, our electromagnetic field.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they do manifest, maybe they need to take a charge, or maybe, yes, they do emit a charge.
Mm-hmm.
In one way or another, it would affect things nearby. It would be
Right.
interesting too, because people use EMF detectors all the time when they're looking for ghosts. Um, people use them too, looking for UFOs or UFO hunting or whatever. It
Hmm.
would be interesting if like they started taking them to Bigfoot expeditions and seeing if they spiked at like different times or stuff like that.
Right, and that's something that we certainly do because it
Yeah.
feels incredibly connected. You know, this cocktail party of supernatural is seems all interwoven like a web, and I
Oh,
strongly
yeah.
suggest people do that as part of their regimen if they're going to bring their toys. Do you have toys like that yourself?
I have a pretty simple EMF detector, just a classic compass too, nothing fancy. Good camera. That's pretty much it, and a flashlight, of course.
So, what has Zelia caught with her toys? What kind of have you caught? Audio, video, measured interesting stuff.
I have gotten anomalous readings on my EMF detector. It was it was kind of weird. The house that I live in is actually it's pretty old. It's a Victorian Gothic revival house that was built in the 1860s. And we've had, strange occurrences here. I'm always hesitant to label things as ghosts, but I guess that's probably what people would call it.
Right.
Just a few sightings of apparitions, misplaced voices,
Hmm.
footsteps, stuff like that. And so, of course, I break out my EMF detector every now and again, and
Hmm.
usually there's nothing, but then every now and again, there'll be just like this one anomalous spot of EMF that spikes in various places throughout the house.
Hmm.
And I can't pin it down. Of course, I've nailed down where all of the appliances are and the electrical, the floors, and stuff like that. And then just as soon as it's there, it's gone.
What about dreams? Have your dreams changed at all in that house? Have you had interesting dreams that seem layered or, you know, prophetic?
Boy, that is an interesting question. So I've always had exceptionally like clear dreams, I would say, and I've been able to recall them very well as well. But definitely, it's one of those things too where it's like my family will sometimes all have the same, like not the same dream, but a similar aspect across everyone's dreams the same night, stuff like that. I've had a few instances where I've had, I guess, what you would call prophetic dreams, but of course, it's nothing of any importance. It's usually just like kind of a random scene that I'll see the very next day or the next week or something like that. But that's kind of been with me my whole life. So I'm not sure if the house is fault or not.
Right. But in your dreams, you don't have these ghosts, for lack of a better term. You don't have them visiting you in your dreams.
Nothing like that. There was one dream that was a little weird, where I don't know, it was almost like I was, well, see, and this is another thing. I had this, for lack of a better word, it was kind of like a memory download, while I was awake, where I was just, I was sitting doing like reading a book or something, and then all of a sudden it just like, you know, like a memory that was not mine kind of was just like there. I was thinking about it as though I was this other person who I think probably was the guy who owned our house. And everything, it was like really clear. It's really hard to explain because it's just exactly like it was my memory, but it wasn't mine. It was him discussing a business deal with something. And so I had a dream kind of similarly to that effect. Sometime after that, I would say probably 6 months to a year after that. But it was nothing like, nothing earth shattering or groundbreaking or anything like that. It was just kind of a simple, like,
Hmm.
thinking about the daily goings ons. So,
Right. Right.
mhm.
So, are you the only one experiencing this?
My sisters and mom have both experienced things. My youngest sister, actually Chloe, when she was younger, used to hear a male voice in the house quite a bit, but then as she got older, it kind of quit happening. And then my mom, actually, it was really weird. She was able to kind of confirm an apparition sighting that I had because while I was downstairs and I saw this, what I thought was actually my mom coming down the steps, this was some years ago, reflected in this mirror that reflected the staircase.
Hmm.
At that exact same time, she thought that one of us went upstairs and opened her bedroom door. So, yeah, it's kind of been,
Hmm.
again, it's very off and on. It's not like, your classic haunted house where it's like every day, chains rattling and,
Right.
voices and stuff like that. It's just every now and again, it's almost like it kind of happens in spurts.
Right.
um, where a bunch of stuff will happen. There'll be a flurry of stuff, and then all of a sudden, it'll be months where nothing happens. So even though there have been recently, the thing is, my youngest sister Chloe is often home alone, and she'll swear that she hears us come home. It was actually to the point once where I was at the store with my mom, and she called us saying that she thought someone had broken into the house. Now, why she didn't call the police, I don't know why, but she said that there was someone in the house, and so she, wanted us to get home. And we got home, and there was just, nothing out of place. No one was there, but she was sure that she heard someone moving around downstairs in the kitchen. And so that's a really common occurrence. But
What about hearing your name? Do you guys ever hear your names called out by something that's not your? It sounds as though it's mimicking something.
yeah, that's a pretty common occurrence. Again, it's, nothing like every time, like every day or anything like that, but
Mm-hmm.
every couple of months it'll be like just a week where, all of a sudden we're all like, okay, did you just call my name? And we're all like, no,
Mm-hmm.
nope, I didn't. So
And so for Zelia's dollar, what's the most interesting case out there? Which one do you just find yourself going back to, or activity or cryptid? What really gets you going?
that is really a difficult question, but I would probably have to say it's the Mothman of Point Pleasant. And a huge part of that is just because, I mean, Keel's coverage of all of those events was just amazing. And there's so much more than even his book, which is like the most comprehensive account of the Mothman.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even cover everything because you have his journals and his correspondences, and material was actually taken out of the Mothman prophecies to make the Eighth Tower, which is another amazing book. So yeah, I would say probably, excuse me, the Mothman prophecies. That book, and then the Mothman of Point Pleasant is like the most interesting case for me.
And
But
so, is this ongoing activity in Point Pleasant? I know that they have their annual festival there. Which have you
mhm.
been to the festival?
Not yet, but I am planning on going this upcoming year. So
Okay.
I'm
Are they
really
still?
excited about that.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
want to go too. Are they still having activity there? There's still reports.
I believe every now and again something will happen. But that whole area has had just, such a long history of general weirdness,
Hmm.
that kind of is just continuing through this, even I guess you could say in spite of the Mothman.
Hmm.
That was just kind of almost a culminating point, but just one of many it seems to be.
Right now, can you go back through the historical ledgers to newspaper clippings or oral traditions of natives that lived out there about this winged creature? And let's remind
Mhm.
people too that this is a rather large cryptid with very abnormally short wings, right? This is not supposed to
Oh
happen. This
yeah.
this is something just physical, right? It shouldn't be able to have flight, at least for the kind of flight that these witnesses describe. But does it? Can we go back and find history of this particular cryptid in that area?
As far as I know, I think there might be a few accounts, in like, yeah, the Native American oral traditions, of something like that. But as far as like an actual like history of recurring sightings of the Mothman, it seems like it really was concentrated just in that 13 months before the Silver Bridge collapse.
Hmm.
Um, and the weird history of the area definitely has more to do, I feel, with like hauntings and UFOs, and your typical scattering of like lake monsters and river monsters and stuff like that. Bigfoot is another one that's appeared very often there, as far as I
Right.
remember. Um, but yeah, I feel like the UFO presence in that area is really strong. And of course, in the legends, it wasn't phrased as UFOs because that's kind of just our modern terminology for it.
Right. Now, um, going into the story of Point Pleasant, you can't help but talk about the Silver Bridge collapse. But uh, why was the Mothman so linked to the bridge collapse? What was it about its appearance that linked it all together? I don't know if I know the answer to that.
See, it's one of those. It's kind of like a chicken or the egg scenario. I feel, because a lot of people, almost superstitiously blame the Mothman for the bridge collapse. They say that it somehow caused it, or, it brought. Apparently, there were sightings of strange men on the bridge before it collapsed. And so some people claim that it, brought this kind of upon that area. It's kind of my running theory. And it's a little weird, so just hear me out on this. But it's kind of my running theory that Mothman might be some sort of manifestation of mankind's latent ability to kind of read the future. I mean, there's lots of evidence for the fact that we can sort of predict what's coming, not with like any genuine clarity, but with some pretty clear trends. And what if the Mothman is kind of this like cultural manifestation, this cultural thought form that does predict disasters? I mean, you can see very similar iconography across many different world cultures. The banshee is like a really good example of that. This belief that things can kind of become omens. And that doesn't mean then that the Mothman caused it. It just means that it was there for it, if that makes sense.
Right. You're seeing that it's a harbinger, a tulpa that was created to kind of represent man's greatest fear, this latent ability that they have.
Yeah, that's kind of my running theory on it, I would say.
Okay. So that it would stand to reason that maybe this would happen in other cases, like the World Trade Centers collapsing,
Hmm.
things like that. Do you know if there's any cases of there being cryptids seen before something as magnificent and crazed and awful as that? I've never heard of stories linking that to, the World Trade
There
Center in
were,
particular.
I can't remember exactly where it happened, but on the day on 9/11, there were sightings of Black Panthers, actually.
Really?
And I think it was, yeah, I can't remember,
Okay.
again, I can't remember exactly where it was, but I think it was at least within the state, or somewhere nearby. Black Panthers, and I believe a sighting of a black dog. But see, and that's the thing too with this is kind of, yeah, why does it manifest in certain situations but not in others or not in
Mm-hmm.
all? And then you have cases too, like the Van Meter Visitor, um, which appeared in this tiny town of Van Meter, Iowa in 1903, was very similar to the Mothman in how it looked and how it behaved. There were um, attendant UFO sightings, a case of a lapse in memory as well, lots of
Mm-hmm.
high strangeness. And there was really no massive tragedy that occurred in Van Meter, near or around that time. It just kind of vanished.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it could just be too. I mean, considering that the future really isn't set, it's kind of just constantly forming. It's all probability. So I mean, sometimes these things might show up and there's nothing then, you know, actually happening, and then other times something will happen and they didn't show up at all.
Out of all the cases you've looked at, what one raises the most red flags? Which one are you concerned that is actually not true? That there's something else going on that raises red flags for you?
Hmm. Boy, that's I tend to try and like rule those out right away. Actually.
Well, for
Just
example, a lot
because,
of people look
yeah.
at something like Roswell and saying, "Well,
Mhm.
you know, we've heard enough about Roswell. First of all, it's a blown up issue, and we've all heard enough
Mhm.
about it. But that there's some real red flags there too. I know, oddly enough, there's a place out near here called Maury Island where people believe that Roswell was basically a government setup job
Mm,
to play a
yeah.
cat and mouse game away from the real incident, which happened out here in Washington State. But as far as it relates to red flags for you, is there anything that people would be surprised what you think?
Hmm. That's a good question.
Hmm.
Um,
Or even
for a
cryptid
while there,
wise, if
yeah.
there's a particular cryptid that you think is that can't be.
Boy, yeah, like I said, I tend to just kind of avoid them. But um,
Well, what
I
about something
suppose
like a dog man? Do you have questions about that? Do you put that in the believability box?
I do. I researched the man wolf and dog man phenomenon really extensively when I was younger. Because Linda Godfrey is also from Wisconsin. I actually went
Hmm.
to one of her book signings when I was 10, and it just completely changed, my life. Because there's someone researching this stuff who's like, an adult and, actually making a life out of it.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, the man wolf and dog man. I do think that that is something worth looking into. And again, that's something where most likely in many of these cases we can't really just chalk it up to it being an animal, or a corporeal flesh and blood creature.
Hmm.
Um, but instead maybe something more like a tulpa or thought form or ultra terrestrial. Um,
Right.
and again, there are some cases too within that where it does appear to be just a creature, but there are so many others where, vanishing or suddenly appearing or glow
Hmm.
in the dark man wolves, that's another one. Um, all of these things we can't really just chalk up to it being an animal.
No, and one of the
But
things you mentioned too in your when I heard you on a podcast,
mhm,
or it could have been one of your YouTube channels, you were mentioning that John Keel threw the kitchen sink at the phenomena and the ultra terrestrial phenomena was
mhm,
basically explaining everything
yeah.
as one phenomena, and you have an issue to take with that. Why is that?
I do think that there is room for different explanations. Like, just because potentially I think there's a strong potential for, this super spectrum idea to explain a lot of paranormal sightings. At the same time, however, I think there are enough outliers from that we do need to account for. Okay, there might be, flesh and blood creatures that are undiscovered. I mean, of course, there are creatures that are undiscovered, um, and some of them might account for these sightings of like Bigfoot, or yeah, maybe there is, something like the man wolf that is just a natural creature, a natural phenomenon.
Right.
And with extraterrestrials too, there's so much of a probability that there is life in the universe. I mean, it's pretty much a fact. And so the fact then that it could evolve into something as intelligent or likely more intelligent than we are is just, it kind of has to be accepted in my mind.
Hmm.
So I do think that there is enough room, in the paranormal for all of these different things to exist. And that not any one explanation can really do away with all of them.
Hmm. What is your current opinion about the state of disclosure when it comes to unidentified aerial phenomena? Everything transpiring from the New York Times article to local news not playing the sound of X Files music every time they have, you know what I'm talking about here. They're taking it
Oh
more
yeah,
serious. So what do you
yeah.
think's going on?
Of course, I'd love to be hopeful, but truthfully, I don't know. I am incredibly cynical and just kind of worried that it's going to be one more cover. I mean, everything kind of seems to flip flop every now and again, and it just seems really interesting to me that, all of a sudden it's all kind of shifting. And then, of course, there are some people who are saying that, the plan has been all along that they're going to disclose all the evidence after the American public or, the worldwide public is prepared for it through movies and TV and stuff like that. And,
Hmm.
that might be true. Um, I don't know. I'm not placing any bets on them actually releasing everything.
All right. Well, I feel like you and I are avoiding a topic here that I very much want to get into. It's a topic that we discussed off the air here. And we're going to go to the lodge after this break. And in particular, we are going to the Black Lodge and visiting the White Lodge. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, you'll find out. We'll be right back with Zelia Edgar.
This year, make it a Feral by Aaron Christmas or Yule. Imagine above the hearth an empty sock. Stick a Feral by Aaron rattle inside that baby. Underneath the tree, what do? I don't know. He or she loves interesting alchemy sound tools. Oh my gosh. Get an elk hide drum, or a bearskin drum, or deerskin drum. Or, if you have a Christmas spirit that lingers, and it's this time to shuffle off to Buffalo, you may want to look at Smudge Fans. Feral by Aaron has beautiful, crafted museum quality, and I mean that, alchemy sound tools. That's at Feral by Aaron at Etsy.com. So hang up a piece of mistletoe, get online, and make Feral by Aaron your one stop shop. Strange Brow Radio wishes you and all your family a happy holiday, beautiful Yule, and a Merry Christmas.
We're back with Zelia Edgar. And before we went to break, I had mentioned that we were going someplace elsewhere, a world that I was ultimately very familiar with, and many of my friends. We would find various ways to plan whole evenings, if not 24 to 48 hours dedicated to one show, and that show's Twin Peaks. Living right outside of it, about an hour away from North Bend, Washington. I should have been there several times by now, but actually, I haven't ventured there since probably the middle of the 90s. So it's time for a revival. And I've been waiting for a fan. And I think, Zelia, you're that fan. And I think this is going to be a good part of the podcast. So the first place I want to go is, how did you find out about the show, and how big of a fan are you?
Oh my gosh. Well, I told you off the air,
Yeah.
Twin Peaks changed my life. Like, I had never seen anything like it when I started watching it. And actually, my mom was a fan back when it first aired. And so, I think we had just finished some series. I can't remember what it was. And so it may have been Fargo, the TV rendition of Fargo. I don't know if we finished season 2 or season 1 or what it was. Um, and so we were all like trying to find, something else to watch. And she was like, oh, well, let's try this. And so we started up Twin Peaks, and it was just like totally blew my mind. So yeah, I'm a pretty massive fan.
Okay, so how massive of a fan? Like, do you have dialogue memorized?
Um, bits and
Mm-hmm.
pieces. So,
Yeah. Okay. So, but you definitely know episodes, because what I plan here
mhm.
for however long we can do this is, we're going to not go chronically down every episode, although that
Yeah,
would be a good podcast. I mean, we could
that would
probably
be
do that.
awesome.
We'd probably need a couple more peakers on board with us.
Yeah.
But here's the deal, folks, is that I've mentioned this before to Timothy Renner, and he absolutely will not listen to me, that the plaid man phenomena is a tulpa of sorts, based upon whatever Mark Frost and David Lynch are into, because those are the directors and the writers of Twin Peaks. Mainly, I think the mind of Mark Frost, who must be into some really heavy esoteric symbolism and magic, magic with a K, perhaps. And
Yeah.
so I may blame, if that's the right word, Mark Frost for a lot of this. But then again, you have transcendental meditator David Lynch, right? I mean, he is super into what the subconscious mind is into, and these open-ended questions. So
Oh yeah.
um, people are looking into the phenomena of Twin Peaks and don't even know it. For example, the idea that the owls are not what they seem. Let's start there. That's a big one for me. I had no idea how significant those lines would be in this look. And well, first of all, the Mothman might as well be called the Owl Man. Most of the
Yeah.
attributes of what I see there is a giant owl, with shortened feathers, with maybe minus the beak. But let's talk about owls and the world of Twin Peaks. You go first.
That actually completely freaked me out because I can't remember exactly how many years ago it was that I started Twin Peaks. But it was roughly the same time that I was getting really into UFO investigation and specifically alien abduction research. And so, pretty much simultaneously, I'm watching Twin Peaks with the classic line, "The owls are not what they seem," and then reading Bud Hopkins' Missing Time, which of course brings up the memories of the owls and other assorted creatures, but the owls are definitely at the forefront of these screen memories of abductees for their captors. And so that was just like synchronistic almost. Um, yeah, that was really something with
Hmm.
that.
I think even Whitley Strieber, mentions in Communion, having screen memories of sorts, or weird occurrences with owls. And
Yep.
of course, then there's this whole Watcher series, that's really caught people by storm. They're incredibly fascinated by the idea that the owls are some kind of watchers or harbingers here. Of course, one of the attributes of Sasquatch is the 800-pound owl phenomena, where you don't
Mhm.
know exactly how big this owl is, but it's certainly not just a raptor in a tree. There's something else going
Yeah.
on here. So, the idea that Twin Peaks is linked in more ways than a TV show to this phenomena doesn't just stop and end, or start and end with owls. It goes way deeper
Mhm.
into this idea that we live just on the cusp of this veil, this thinning veil that exists and we can't see it and we have to wait for it to unlock, or we ourselves have to be unlocked somehow through trial and error. Let's talk about that phenomenon and how has that affected your research at all and how you think, because it certainly has me, but I have
Mhm.
nobody to bounce bounce this show off of and just say, oh my god, they were talking about, so you're it, Zelia. I'm sorry, I'm nerding out here with you, but I think you get it.
Yeah, that is absolutely fine because I feel exactly the same way. I think I even mentioned in my ultra terrestrial video. It's been a while since I made that one. But I mentioned that Twin Peaks is, in my opinion, the best um, portrayal of the ultra terrestrial or super spectrum idea in film or TV anywhere, and I completely stand by that. Just because it does really capture this idea of almost like entities as projections, and then the question, where are these projections coming from, and who is projecting them? And you see that time and time again in Twin Peaks. And that's something too that I think, I do feel like Mark Frost is really responsible for like a lot of the story, and David Lynch is responsible for a lot of like what the heck was that.
Hmm.
And you see that idea across some of his other work too. This idea of like um, the electromagnetic spectrum makes an appearance in especially season 3 of Twin Peaks, and also in
Hmm.
Mulholland Drive. These things appear almost to live inside of it, in my opinion. So, but
Yeah,
yeah, that definitely, yeah,
and
that
Fire
definitely
Walk with
comes
Me,
through.
right? The If anybody
Yeah,
has seen Fire Walk with Me, electricity almost is
yep,
its own character.
yeah. No, that's right.
Right. And this gets back to what Tesla was getting into. I mean, there
Yep.
was a certain amount of speculation that electricity was carrying out more things in the beginnings of Wi-Fi, that it was also a link to spirit forms. And so much of what these witnesses are telling me and probably telling you is that
Mm,
they have encounters with some kind of energy being.
yep.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's cool that you brought up Tesla too, because I know his concept of life almost being transmitted from something received by other things is a revolutionary way of looking at it, and I feel like that is a really good analogy too for
Hmm.
these projections or these entities, possibly being sent and received, and that comes through a lot in Twin Peaks as well.
And one of the lines from the star of the show, Dale Cooper, played by Kyle MacLachlan, is this quote here, and I think you'll appreciate it. Dale Cooper says, when two separate events collide, we must pay particular attention. Now, that's the world of synchronicity. And this is
Hmm.
very difficult to explain to people that don't have paranormal events or synchronistic events happen in their life. But this whole concept of things being made for you, personalized for you to unlock these key events. You see that time and time again in your work?
Yeah, actually, it's really weird that you mentioned that because you wanting to do Twin Peaks as part of the show today is kind of the result of a synchronicity. I was literally just telling my mom because I was on Steve Ward's podcast, The High Strangeness Factor, and I had just mentioned that the really cool intro reminds me a lot of the Twin Peaks theme song. And then we walked into a half price bookstore, and the song that immediately starts playing is the Twin Peaks theme song. And so that was literally yesterday. And then I woke up this morning, or yeah, this morning I think, or maybe it was last night, I can't remember. I got home. Yeah, I got home and saw your Facebook message
Hmm.
today. That's right.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, my week has been crazy just with the holidays and work and stuff.
Right.
And saw your Facebook message, and then that was when, yeah, it definitely the synchronicity was like
Right.
right there.
Well, let me
Yeah.
add to it because yesterday I shot the host, because I listened to that podcast before we spoke, and I heard the bumper music, and I immediately shot him a message and said, "Nice bumper music, reminds me of something."
Seriously.
Yes,
Oh my
of course I did, because that's, I mean, I went right back to that world when you have that 50s, wailing guitar in the background there. That
yeah.
is, that is that's James Hurley,
Yeah.
serenading.
Oh my gosh.
Totally.
Yeah, oh
Yeah.
man, just you, that's right.
Oh yeah.
Oh jeez.
If anybody really wants to throw up in their mouth, Go download James Hurley singing the song "Just You" to Maddie Ferguson, and you'll feel a little bit of salt come up your throat. It's pretty bad. In fact, he's
He
one of the worst
reprised it in
characters.
season 3.
Right, right,
Oh,
right.
man. Yeah. Oh, when that came on, I was like, "Seriously?" Like,
Hmm.
I kinda suspected it after seeing it, but then it actually happened, and I was like, "No. Oh, David
Right.
Lynch, why?"
And the character didn't the actor who plays the character didn't go on to do great things in life, and there's a reason for that. I'm sure he's a great carpenter, but the acting chops weren't happening. We didn't watch
Yeah.
the show for all of the acting chops, by the way, although most of the characters were so well written, so quirky, and it
Oh, yeah.
really captures. Right, I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I understand
Mhm.
how quirky a small town is, especially a lumber town. And I think
Yeah.
David Lynch is from Spokane, Washington, or he lived for a stint in
Yeah.
Spokane, Washington. It seriously affected his artistic palette. This is a
Mhm.
lot of the premises right now. So for that reason, I was caught on to it. I may have been introduced to it late in the game. I actually was not the cool kid in class. Most of the
What?
really awesome stuff was introduced to me by a group of Mormons, and they they understood cool way better than I did. So it was the
Oh,
Mormons.
man.
They drugged me into the world of Twin Peaks and good music.
That is
So I'm eternally
crazy, oh my god.
grateful towards the LDS. If you're listening right
Oh my
now.
god.
Yeah, I think I have some LDS fans actually. So yeah, bravo. So yeah, okay,
Oh,
let's talk about the this idea of there being duality, a lodge. There's a character in there called the Log Lady, and her
mhm,
husband is imbued or internalized or is a tulpa, and she carries around this log, which is basically
mhm,
him in effigy, and she has these cryptic messages, and they're almost like dream type messages. So for example, you'll walk into one of the restaurants, which in this case is the fabulous R&R diner, and
yep,
there she'll be sitting with her log and her little wool sweater, and she'll turn to you with her red horn rimmed glasses and say something cryptic like a crazy woman would. The only thing with the log lady is that she's a seer. She's she's someone that you need to talk to because she's giving you a message you need to hear. You see that in your work.
yeah, I would say so. I mean, to a certain extent, it really reminds me of many of the contactees that Keel was involved with the main difference being he definitely well, I think by the time that he really was enveloped in the paranormal, he was very cynical of it just because of what had happened with,
Hmm.
the Mothman in Point Pleasant. Because he became very involved in the lives of those people, and then so many of them just died with the bridge collapse.
Right.
And that's just that part of the Mothman prophecies is just completely heart wrenching to read. Just the statements of who died and all
Hmm.
of that. So he became very cynical. I feel of
Hmm.
not of the phenomenon, but of how it kind of plays games with us. However, a lot of the contactees that he dealt with, again, that because I was reading all this stuff simultaneously, it is very Log Lady-esque, and she is very contactee-esque. The main difference being, in the world of Twin Peaks, her messages tend to make a lot more sense in the long run, even though they are incredibly cryptic. Whereas theirs seem to make more sense. The contactees, but in reality, usually, the dates were off. That was a huge thing with Keel. He would often get prophecies of upcoming assassinations. Martin Luther King Jr. was actually one of them, and it was off by several months. But it was all the contactee gave him correct information prior to the event, just with a slightly incorrect time or place, and that happened a lot with him.
Wow. They talk a lot about contactees in Twin Peaks as well.
Mhm.
Bobby Briggs' father, Major Briggs, is a part
Mm,
of
yeah.
Project Blue Book, an ongoing program that goes back to where we were before a commercial break with the element of disclosure in these programs
Mhm.
under different names. If you ask me, Mark Frost was trying to give something away to the people that could understand the secret handshake that
Mhm.
was going on. Do you agree with that?
I do think that it seems like he was pointing to kind of a more unified field theory for the UFO problem throughout a lot of his work because you can't deny the connections to,
Mm-hmm.
UFOs in Twin Peaks or even, any element of the paranormal. And the fact that it's pointed out as being all connected to this idea of energy, this idea of projections, in a larger spectrum. So, yeah, I would agree with that.
Right. And for those who doubt this concept that this could be it prophetic or the part that these gentlemen who are part of, their own hidden class, their own little hidden cocktail parties that they have, their own hidden secret handshakes. Look at the similarities between these links of what happened on 9/11 and the messages smuggled away in the movie The Matrix. If anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, there are particular scenes throughout episodes of The Simpsons and The Matrix and other cultural phenomena that have absolute connections to what happened on 9/11. I didn't expect to be talking about 9/11 more than
Yeah.
once during the show, but it's a major touchstone in human history. But there seems to be a link between directors, writers, uh,
hmm
predicting this stuff. What do you think of that?
It's really interesting. I follow Lauren Coleman's blog, The Copycat Effect.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, they're definitely, it's kind of like the old question of life imitates art. I mean, is this stuff prophetic or is it kind of paving the way in our subconscious for these things to be carried out? I don't know. Maybe it's a two-way street and it's kind of the past and the future creating each other.
Right. I think in The Simpsons, there's even an incredible scene of Donald Trump starting his campaign in the escalators, and it is almost verbatim drawn out and worded. It's just incredible, and I think that was like shot in the early '90s or something like that. So I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know
Back to
what's
the Future
going on.
too has scenes like that too.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
I know some of the stills from that movie. It's just kind of jarring.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And the Matrix episode that I'm referring to, if anybody's curious about what I'm alluding to, and I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, Zelia, the scene where Neo, the character, shows his passport, and on
mm,
his passport is the date 9/11, and I think there's some
really.
connections on his passport beyond just the date there that kind of links a time in history. And there's some other stuff throughout the Matrix, I think, linked as well. But let's talk about the duality again here. The idea of there being the black and the white, the white lodge and the black lodge. I alluded that before we went to break, and I want to talk about that now. This idea of there being the duality of good and evil, the yin and the yang. How has that affected your work, and how do you think that connects to the world of Twin Peaks?
I feel like that concept is very like Carl Jung. And it's this idea that yeah, every inside everything there is kind of like the dark side, or the alter ego, I suppose. I think he referred to it as the shadow self.
Right.
And um, it is interesting because I feel like more often than not, if you have to acknowledge its existence, otherwise, it will kind of like sneak up on you and consume you. But also, if you
Hmm.
try to struggle against it and try to change it, it will also consume you. And you see that in the end episode of season two,
Hmm.
when Dale is in the Black Lodge, and he does end up catching himself, but then it's not his proper self who's released from the lodge. Of course, it's his doppelganger. So
Right. The idea, and explain to everybody what a doppelganger is.
a doppelganger literally is, I believe, means double walker. It's an exact replica of a person or a person's soul, I feel, in the world of
Hmm.
Twin Peaks. However, in the world of Twin Peaks, they are denizens of the Black Lodge. So each doppelganger, I feel, represents the shadow side characteristics of the person. And weirdly enough, the thing that tipped it off for me for Dale was when he squeezed out all the toothpaste.
Sure.
Because of course he just, everything about Dale Cooper was like, perfectly metered. He did things exactly by the book, even though it wasn't anyone else's book, it was his own.
Hmm.
And so that scene where he just completely loses it on that tube of toothpaste before smashing his face into the mirror, it was kind of all of that just tipped on its head. So very interesting.
if you can go onto YouTube and type in just another tinfoil hat, you will see Zelia doing a perfect impression of everything she just described, except for the toothpaste. But it is what a fan would do. They would humiliate themselves for their art, and
Oh,
she
yes.
she definitely went to that level. Perfect.
Thank you.
I totally get it. Yeah, I was explaining to you beforehand. One of my
Mhm.
early projects as a production design major was to figure out how to speak backwards and play it forward so it made sense. And so
Oh,
when I
yeah.
saw
It's
you
trickier than
doing
it
it,
looks.
it's very tricky. And then, these actors had to obey David Lynch's crazy commands. And so they must have had to learn how to speak backwards.
Yeah. Oh my
N-
gosh. I actually have a picture of myself with the toothpaste, by the way. So,
oh, great.
yes, Kyle McLaughlin actually on Instagram, I'll out how incredibly dorky I am. He had a Twin Peaks costume contest. And so that was my entry. I got whatever the like equivalent of an honorable mention is. I wasn't his little like, slideshow of photos, but someone else won who did the eyeless woman from season 3, and that was genuinely an
Oh,
amazing costume, so they deserved it.
oh, yeah, I'll call her a critter of sorts that
Yeah.
escapes out of what I presume is the Black Lodge, right? Is that was your take? Is that most of the world that where Dale was the Black Lodge?
I feel like most of it was,
Hmm.
I kind of wonder, in my opinion, the little sitting room that she came from, I
Hmm.
feel like is kind of almost a foyer into what is outside of the Black Lodge, if that makes
Okay,
sense.
right.
Kind of like this larger, even more expansive universe. If the Black Lodge is supposed to be some sort of parallel of our own, maybe it's,
Hmm.
whatever is producing that parallel, just part of a larger whole. So,
Yeah. It's very difficult to not want to just investigate these hot zones, what I call skin twins, which is my
mhm.
term for places that are like Skinwalker Ranch. They're all
Oh,
over the
yeah.
world. And if I could dedicate a show to interviewing witnesses that live on skin twins, I would put that call out right now. Get a hold of me immediately at strangebrowradio at
Yeah. Okay.
gmail.com. But Twin Peaks is one of those places. It's a skin twin, and these
Mhm.
places are all over the globe. And you've mentioned a couple of them. What do you think is one of the more interesting skin twins?
Boy, well, it's interesting because I mean, there are so many different ways of categorizing them too. I know Sanderson called, I mean, not Skinwalker Ranch in particular, but he referred to them as vile vortices or the 12 Devil's Graveyards, these huge expanses of places that, just had a really weird vibe and had weird things happen. I think probably the ultimate one for me would probably be the Molotov Pass in Russia, where that party of hikers
Yeah.
was killed under mysterious circumstances just because there's such a long history of sightings there. People have avoided it for centuries, and then here you have this troop of hikers deciding just to walk through. Um, and that's a case too that's really difficult to nail down because it appears, and this is a little morbid, but it appears that the hikers did die kind of in waves, and the first ones were from hypothermia, which then sets the tone for the rest. People say, oh, it was just natural causes, but it really wasn't. There were actually marks of strange radiation on the bodies, and then some of them appeared to have been crushed from the inside with no external injuries. So I'd say that's probably top of my list just because it was such a momentous
Hmm.
loss of life under such strange circumstances, and there are still sightings of orbs and UFOs and things like that.
Right. And there's an incredible 3 or 4 part series on the pass itself. But I guess I'm shocked to hear you say that, but you're absolutely right. It's such an incredible encounter. So many mysterious things about that, not to mention the fact that the hikers were struggling to get out of their tents, and
Yeah.
most of the evidence seemed like they were trying to get away from something. They were
Mhm.
barefooted when they were panicking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's just so much. Just something went so wrong so fast too. It just, I don't know. It's kind of jarring.
Yeah.
Eh,
Yeah, good
yeah, the
choice.
state of yeah, thank you. Yeah.
That's really good. I mean, and I think that they've opened up this case again. I don't think that I think that's been reopened within the last couple
Mhm.
years. So
I believe
maybe
you're right on that, yeah.
new data coming in. And so you don't put a cryptid uh, as the murder weapon, is or do you?
No, not in that case. I see that is the question of, cryptids or anything with the paranormal and, inflicting pain or death or harm or anything like that is, it's not really anything that a paranormal investigator really wants to think about, I feel. Because for me personally, I'm just so excited about trying to find the thing. I don't want to think about it then trying to kill me. Um, but in that case, too, I feel like, and again, as morbid as this is, there's almost marks of similarities to cattle mutilations and other animal mutilations in that area. Now, again, as far as UFOs or whatever is piloting UFOs being the cause of it, I'm not going to nail down that answer either. But
No, you bring up a good point. In fact, the last podcast I released was with a philosopher by the name of Sonia Zohar, and she's eager to get out to Skinwalker Ranch and visit.
mhm,
And I think one of the questions I posed her is like, well, why doesn't that scare you? And she goes, well, because nothing's ever happened to those guys while they're
yeah,
out there. But you bring up a good
mhm,
point that once in a while, if this is a skin twin that we're talking about, or what did you call it, a biovortice, once in a while, people are treated like cattle.
mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is definitely an eerie thought.
Now, have you ever seen a mutilation? Have you ever, if you're an active investigator for MUFON, did you ever go to a cattle mutilation at all?
Nope, I never had a case like that, unfortunately.
No.
Um, I would definitely be interested in seeing one. So if anyone has a mutilated cow, please let me know.
Hmm.
But yeah, of course, I've seen photographs online, and that is actually um, one of those things that you do need to be very careful with because predatory birds and things like that, just decay can appear like cattle mutilations, but then there are, so many cases that are just completely outliers, such as when the animal has been dropped, it's actually like hit the ground with some velocity and actually imprints itself into the ground.
Hmm.
I believe at Skinwalker Ranch, there were some that appeared to have like almost like pinking shear type patterns in the cuts.
Hmm.
And of course, radiation is another thing that's present at some sightings, or if it's in conjunction with a UFO sighting or even a cryptid sighting. These are all things that would really nail it down as okay, this isn't just, a cow died and then the decay set in and then birds pecked out its eyes. This is something else.
Well, in typical Twin Peaks, theme, there's an open-ended question here. What do you think's going on with mutilations in particular?
If I had to really pin down an idea on that, I get the sense sometimes, and this is maybe is a really hopeful way of looking at things, but I kind of get the sense that whatever is doing this is looking for something. And I know some people have even theorized that it might be government. I'm not sure about that. If there are entities that are interested in us, they might be interested on the effects that they have on our organisms or on what's happening with our organisms. Because the interesting thing is, a lot of the time, the tissue that's taken from these bodies is that which would be useful for determining uh, radioactive a radioactive presence in the body. Um, so I don't know if maybe they are measuring to see if these things have been affected by some sort of radiation or what.
Oh, I've never heard
Um,
that.
yeah, it's typically I can't remember exactly where I read this, but it was
Hmm.
yeah, it's mainly organs that are easily affected by radiation that are
Hmm.
high on the list of being taken.
One of the questions in Twin Peaks is um, an astrological question. When Jupiter and Saturn align, doorways open. Do you use determining astrological symbols to do work? Are there times where you feel like that things are more active?
I wish that I had the proper time to really like develop that theory because I think that astrology probably was a way better science some thousands of years ago. And this is an idea that I had that I also saw in Keel's work, that, it doesn't mean anything if you're born with your sun in Pisces. It's just that at that time there was a specific energetic or gravitational force which acted upon, your DNA as it formed at the time
Hmm.
of your forming. And so I think that there probably is something to it. I think that what we're working with now is definitely a much more blunt instrument than it was, when it
Hmm.
was first developed. Um, but yeah, no, I just kind of have a casual interest in astrology currently, but I would definitely like to get to the point where I could actually, potentially use it to see if, yeah, there are certain times where things peak or not. I know actually, and this is a weird thing, our house was actually only owned by 5 families ever. It was the family who built it through 1905, and then this other family until the 80s. And the last guy of that family to live here apparently was really into horoscopes. And he, like, if, he figured something out and it told him not to go out that day, he wouldn't go out.
Hmm.
So, apparently we had that living here in the 80s, so that's kind of interesting.
Another big theme, and it's the tagline to my podcast, is I will see you in the trees. It's how I'll end this broadcast as well. What do you think it is about the trees? Because there's certainly something there.
I think for that, it kind of harkens back to the log lady, actually. It's this idea that there's memory or, spirit, I guess you could say, in the world of Twin Peaks, kind of embedded in this living yet not considered alive substance of wood. Um, it's interesting to note too that Harold Smith refused to leave his house, which was a log cabin, if I remember correctly. It was built out of wood. And so I feel like there is something in Twin Peaks with this notion that memory and,
Mhm.
even a personality can be stored in this substance. So, as we even
Right.
saw with Josie's demise.
Do you say Josie?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought that up. Yeah. She's imbued in a drawer, wooden drawer knob.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the character you talked about before, Harold Smith, was this
Yeah.
kind of shut in that was also the confidant, probably more of like the sexual liaison of Laura Palmer. I think if I remember in the diary, but there was definitely a relationship with many men and Laura. I don't know if Harold was one of them, but he was a
Mhm.
shut in inside this little log cabin. And when he tried to leave, he would convulse. He would just dwindle down to the fetal position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like definitely he viewed, I mean, not only just his home as suffering from agoraphobia, but possibly the very walls as protection from something that he had been, exposed to through Laura.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
Laura, here we go. I mean, we're going to talk a lot about John Keel in this episode as well, because before Laura's death, before the eventual death of Annie Wilkes, who I
Mhm.
believe, I presume that she has died or she's trapped. Um, there are all these harbingers warning the town that something is going to unfold. So it's very much like the Mothman prophecies. Do you think they borrowed from Keel's work to make this in such a specific way?
I've tried to look for that connection,
Hmm.
and so far I haven't found it, which only makes it weirder.
Hmm.
And I personally started to wonder too, because I know that David Lynch is, as you mentioned earlier, very much into transcendental meditation.
Hmm.
If there might be some wavelength that Keel was researching, from the conscious angle that potentially David Lynch picked up on subconsciously,
Right.
is kind of what I'm wondering.
Now, I've met David Lynch. In fact,
Sorry.
yeah, I know,
Oh
right?
my god.
I've met him, and then I don't know if I should spoil the beans here because she's an earshot. My girlfriend actually met him too and auditioned for Firewalk with me, but didn't get the
Oh
role
my
because
god.
she didn't speak the right language. But yeah, so we both have a small connection to this world just by way of meeting her. Hers more significantly than mine.
Oh my
She was
gosh.
actually working with him, but everything I've ever heard about David is that he's so normal and quirky and kind and giving. But there's a
Mhm.
documentary about David Lynch's life, and it is quite uh, dark and depressing.
Really?
I was a little shocked by that. I didn't expect to hear that because um, if you ask me, he almost has a bone to pick with reality because
Yeah.
his version of reality was so not appreciated by both his parents.
Oof.
Yeah.
Wow, that's I know that see, I've listened to a few of his talks on TM or Transcendental Meditation,
Hmm.
and I know that he mentioned that before he came across that, he kind of had a hard time, I guess, with the world or with reality or with himself.
Right.
So, but yeah, I did not know that. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah. Very, very incredible. Through the dark, a future's past, the magician longs to see. Now, if there is just a tagline in itself, I mean, it's such an incredible first line of anything dark talking to you. And there is absolutely this sense of an enchantment or a spell beginning in the character Bob, who is just the incarnate of fire and evil and darkness. And he needs to be fed. He consumes goodness like a log in a fire. Um,
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit about the shadow, the darkness of it all. What have you worked on in your own private cases that is maybe just too dark for you and you had to back out of it, or what do you think of the shadow world and darkness in general in this work?
I've never really run it well, the only thing I ran across that really made me back away from anything like that, was actually John Keel's The Eighth Tower. Um, I read it, I think, when I was, like, 17, and, the concept it's all like, not all the material, but it's a lot of the material that was removed from the Mothman prophecies,
Hmm.
and it's when he really starts to nail down, this idea of the super spectrum ultra terrestrials.
Hmm.
And, it's like most of the book is kind of dealing with like the logic of it, and trying to get past, okay, what if there are like, I guess we could say worlds or a world outside of our own that coincides with our own. And that was really exciting to me.
Right.
But then, as I mentioned, he became very cynical of the phenomenon. And, you know, I would say pretty impressionable still at that age. And that was a lot for me to deal with. Was him kind of trying to suggest and figure out why something would want to play games with us, what our purpose is and stuff in this massive charade. So
Hmm.
that was the one thing that actually made me kind of back off for a little bit. But since that time, I don't know, I kind of just grew out of it and was like, okay, well, moving on, let's see what's next. And so far, there really hasn't been anything that's given me pause. I mean, once you start getting into like, yeah, alien abductions, that's something that's has the potential to be incredibly dark, and you want to know, like, yeah, why are people being
Hmm.
taken, seemingly normal people
Hmm.
having their lives interrupted and then they're not able to remember things. And, so that's probably the other thing that, like, I recognize, how deep it can go, but I'm to the point, I guess, where I just want to know.
Right. He
So I
must have
kind of keep
come to some
looking.
kind of conclusion that there was something negative happening because if I'm to believe what Timothy Renner told me, that uh, somebody asked him at a book signing, how do I have my own experiences? And Keel's response was a little
Yep.
bit shocking. He said, why would you want to? Why would you want
Yep.
to have these experiences? And that is not at all what he's writing in the beginning. An encouragement of, the questioner to go
Yep.
out and seek answers here. But here we go again with these great minds towards the end of their life reevaluating, like, you know what do you think that is? Do you think that they felt as though they've wasted their life away looking into this, something like sand going through their hands?
That, I guess, probably is my deepest fear is like, you spend so much time looking into this stuff and trying to figure it out, and it does get to the point where it just kind of seems like it's impossible.
Hmm.
So I think that that probably is what you see a lot with people who try and I mean, and this isn't even the paranormal, this is like any of life's great mysteries,
Hmm.
and you see that a lot. But I don't know, I guess for me, I'm just going to keep on looking, I suppose.
Right, and yet the log lady is a little bit like that. She's jaded by
Mhm.
mystery. She's seen so much of it. She kind of looks at the rest of the characters as doofuses.
Yeah.
She's resentful about a whole host of things, but it seems like she's more resentful at her weight of having to deal with the truth,
Mhm.
the hidden truth. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Hmm.
I know the last episodes too, when she was kind of checking in, once an episode, that was just that was it was amazing. And
Mm-hmm.
those portions of the later episodes are just, awesome. But in a way too, as soon as it got near the end, it was kind of hard to watch. And I know the weird thing too is that that actress and a lot of Twin Peaks actors and actresses, it seems, died shortly after her role was up,
Let,
which is just another
right. Yeah, let's
really
go
weird
through the
concept.
list of characters who have died from the show. Major characters. First of all, her, and then
Yeah.
Jack Nance, right? Who played
Yep.
kind of like this the little dimwit that was
Yeah.
just kind of lurking in the background. But he
He
also
was
was
also
the
Eraserhead, right?
right, and he was in a
Yeah.
lot of David Lynch movies. Like
Mhm.
he was in Dune, he was in Blue Velvet. I'm sure he was in a couple others, Wild at Heart. So he was in a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
Uh, Kyle MacLachlan character's obviously still alive, but Bob,
Yeah.
uh, Frank Silva, the actor who I think at that time was just and far installed as the production side of
Yep.
things,
He got
right?
trapped in a room, right? Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. He was basically trapped inside
Yeah.
one of the shots that was going on and kind of ducking out of view. And through
Mhm.
David's brilliance, discovered one of the main characters who was just a
Yep.
hired hand.
Yeah, that's right. I know, I think he was, he was setting up the set and, someone accidentally, moved a piece of furniture or something in front of the exit, and so they were already
Right,
rolling, he was like,
right.
"Whoops."
And I think
Yeah.
one of the camera guys walked up to David and said, "Sorry, David, we got to reshoot it." Frank was in the shot, and David saw this photo or this still of Frank Silva
Mhm.
with this long gray hair and just his eyes peeking out, like, "Oh, that's what we've been waiting for."
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I know, so cool.
Now, people that are listening to this, I mean, you hear us describing this. How in the world are you sitting on your butt right now, not downloading this on Netflix? I mean, we're giving you gems here. Um,
It is. It's, indescribable really in its
right.
totality. It's just really something. I don't
Um,
know what exactly, but it's something.
right. So yeah, the arm or the midget is dead. Gosh,
David
there's
Bowie too, who was
David
just in
Bowie.
Firewalk with Me, but was supposed to reprise his role, of course.
Right, right. And
Mhm.
instead of David Bowie, they have a 7 foot large, 7 foot tall teapot
Yep.
or something
Yeah.
like that. Right,
Percolator thing, yeah.
right,
Yeah. Oh, man.
right.
Yeah.
And if you ask me, that teapot looked a lot like the Nazi bell, which I don't know. You know what that
Mhm.
is?
Oh, yes. Which
Right.
also looked a lot like the Kecksburg UFO.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So there again, I mean, smuggling little bits of pop culture paranormal into the show, but just enough to wonder where reality breaks off and this incredible show ends and begins. As far as I'm concerned, season three, for people that don't know, it ended with our main star of the show, Dale Cooper, being trapped in this place called the
Mhm.
Black Lodge and the doppelganger getting out. And so in season three, we start up from that point and we find out that that is the case. But for the most
Mhm.
part, season three was a heartbreaker for me because I felt as though David Lynch, more so than probably Mark Frost, and probably way more so than the actors, uh,
Mhm.
I felt as though he was mocking my treasure. he
Yeah.
was he was just stepping all over the grave of all of the characters and the concepts and the beauty of that
Mhm.
world. What do you think of that?
I do think that it was kind of well, because like I said, it was really weird because you would have these high points on the episodes where he was just kind of using them for his vision, and, episode 8 is definitely, strictly that.
Mm-hmm.
But then around it, you did have these kind of caricatures of what Twin Peaks was.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I definitely see that. And I don't know if that was, I know he had a lot of resentment, I guess, about it, having to release who really killed Laura Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
He never wanted to answer that question. And season 2 was, apparently a lot of artistic license was taken from him. So I don't know if that was kind of a response to that,
Right.
or what, because he had complete creative control of season 3, didn't he?
As far as I know, in fact, you can find some of the YouTube clips of him in board meetings getting incredibly irritated because he's supposed to have full creative control, and yet there's still deadlines, there's still a union
Mm,
involved, there's still,
yeah.
rules that apply to a mad magician, and he doesn't
Yeah.
like it.
Oh, yeah, I could definitely see that being the case.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Okay, so the tidbit, I'll play like the just in new information coming across the board here. Looks like perhaps Twin Peaks Part 4 might be in the filming. There was a location scout spotted. Did you hear that gasp on the other end of the
I'm
phone
so
here?
sorry.
That was an audible gasp. It looks as though there was a location scout on site at the R&R diner, basically measuring the blinds. So I don't know this for sure, but I think season 3 was a big enough hit that I think the story may go on.
Oh my gosh. See, I have heard so many rumors about it that it got to the point where I was like, "I'm not going to torture myself anymore.
Right.
If it'll happen, if it happens." But that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
Well,
my
you remember
gosh.
how top secret part, season
Oh,
3
yeah.
was totally right.
Yeah.
But now you have someone with boots on the ground, right? And so that's, like I said, about an hour and a half from my door.
Oh my
So
god.
one of the locals was like on the North Bend Facebook page and said, movie van spot at the R&R diner. Now, could
Oh
it
my
be
word.
any show in particular? Sure. Other shows have filmed there, including that Jeff Bridges show with Sandra Bullock called The Vanishing. That was shot there, which is actually a really good show. If nobody's seen that one, go check out Sandra Bullock and Kiefer Sutherland, Jeff Bridges in The Vanishing. It's very eerie. Jeff Bridges is usually not super creepy, but you just usually picture him as the dude sipping on a Kahlua. But this is super creepy. So that's a side note. But yeah, I think that there is some new filming beginning.
Oh my gosh.
And so my hope is that somebody from the production team will hear this podcast because they'll look the word Twin Peaks up in Strange and they'll find this podcast, and I'll make sure to put this in the subject line. But please save us all the trouble of complaining about what happened in season 3, and own up to the fact that you could do better. I mean, you showed us what you could do in episode 8. You gave
Yeah,
us
that
episode 8, and I'm eternally grateful for episode 8. But
yeah.
we have to fix some things here. Let's talk just briefly about episode 8. One of the phenomena is going on through another podcast, Strange Familiars podcast with Timothy Renner, an author friend of mine, Sig Sigurdsson, who wrote a book called Cultus and another book called Cowslip, is the idea of a harbinger of a woodsman. And this is all
Mm.
throughout Twin Peaks: the
Oh,
guardian,
yeah.
the woodsman. It was the first image I ever saw of a bearded man in plaid
Mhm.
inside of this strange, dreamlike world. Have you ever come across this before? Did Keel write about this?
The Man in Plaid?
Yeah.
Or yeah. Oh, yes. That is actually, that is a really, really common, entity that people observed, and it's one of those things too where you get with the paranormal, it's like there's a few things that it's like, okay, you know, we can kind of it's weird, but we can accept it. And
Hmm.
then there's other things where it's almost absurd. And
Right.
in my opinion, the man in plaid kind of falls into that because not only do you have the man in plaid, but for some reason, plaid is across the board. It's been observed on UFO occupants. People have claimed to see, and this is where the man wolf gets into kind of murky waters. People have claimed to see kind of like, werewolf style man wolves wearing these plaid shirts. Bigfoot as well has been observed in it. And so the question is, what is it about plaid? Another common one is bedroom visitants. A lot of people think of the classic like night hag phenomenon or the kind of monks in robes as these nighttime visitants. But a man in a plaid or checkered shirt is actually one of the most commonly cited entities, even in situations like that. So yeah, it's an icon in this field.
Yeah, but I was so unaware of that at the time, and it's such a strange, image of, is it the I mean the idea that something's wearing a tartan or a plaid
Yeah.
design on them. What would the connection be? Because if you get into, I don't know if you grabbed a copy of Mark Frost's book, Welcome to Twin Peaks. Not so much the latter one for season 3, but there was a smaller one that was almost like a, a dime store book.
Oh, that's cool.
It's a very rare book these days. I'm sure you can find it on eBay. He
I have to
writes
look for it. I
though,
have the season 3 one, but
yeah, he
yeah.
writes inside this book about the Scottish rites and about
Mm,
he goes to Scotland quite a bit in some of his some of his images that he uses, and the
yeah.
tartan is one of those things that he smuggles into the language there. So there must be something to this.
I have wondered about that because I know when you come across these sightings, it's like, what is the deal with plaid? Like, it could be any other pattern, but it's
Hmm.
not. It's a plaid or checkered shirt. And the thing that I've come to two conclusions on it, and of course, I'm sure there's probably something I'm totally missing, but the first one being that having an actual tartan denotes a family, an origin.
Hmm.
So there's the question then of, are these entities kind of claiming then that they belong somewhere, they belong to something? Then again, too, and this is in line with actually the Men in Black. Plaids, of course, are just intersections, crossroad
Hmm.
patterns. And this is a huge icon in the paranormal field. I mean, not just from the crossroads, which of course it features prominently not only in the occult, but actually UFOs have often been spotted over crossroads. But the Men in Black also often wear these cross type designs. So is this kind of just like a statement of this intersection almost,
Hmm.
of like
Oh,
different
right.
planes or different fields?
Yeah, I see what you
That's
mean.
kind
Like
of,
there's a coded
yeah,
message in the lines
yes, yeah.
themselves.
That's kind of what I wonder about the plaid because what else could it, symbolize?
That's
I
really
mean,
brilliant. Did you come up with that?
yeah,
That's really good. No, that's
thank you.
super cool. Yeah.
It's always bothered me. Why the
Mhm.
plaid? And two Men in Black showing up wearing crosses.
Mhm.
It just, it's very strange. So,
Yeah. Yeah, now you got my head spinning. Never thought of that before. That's really interesting way to possibly tie in meaning behind that rather than just like a screen memory of guys that you would accept rather than
yeah,
seeing a
exactly.
gray. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I know, and it's another detail that comes up so often. And I just cuz so often too with these again these absurd sort of encounters,
Mhm.
you have to wonder if this is a mask, what is it meaning to represent? What is it trying to convey? And considering that this idea
Mhm.
of intersection would be so important in this unified field theory of the paranormal, this super spectrum idea,
Mhm.
I just kind of have to wonder if that's what it means.
Right. Well, and now in Twin Peaks, the woodsmen or the guardians are harbingers of such. What do you think that they're harbingers of?
My personal theory on the woodsman ties in actually to the role of trees or wood in Twin Peaks, because of course um, they, I'm assuming, would chop down trees. And so, if we're kind of tying in this idea that wood or wood grain or trees can contain memory or even like the essence of a person or a soul, it's almost like they're chopping that down. They're changing it into something else, would be my initial response to them. And also the fact that they keep asking for a light. Fire again is very important and it's kind of the antithesis. It will eat the
Mhm.
trees, it eats the wood. So that would be my idea about the woodsman is something that kind of cuts down and
Mhm.
consumes human essence or memory.
And let's say this whole spell out loud here because I gave people a teaser, but the whole line from Bob's cohort, the one-armed man, and there's something about arms in particular regarding Twin Peaks, but the whole line
Mm,
in
yeah.
particular is through the dark, a future's
Future
past.
past.
You go ahead and say
The
the
magician,
whole
yeah, the magician longs to see one chance out between two worlds. Fire, walk with me.
right, and then it goes on about I will catch you in my death bag. You think I've gone insane, but I promise you I will kill again. Now I don't necessarily think that the last part of that limerick counts as much as the last line, fire walk with me. What do you
Yeah.
think that that line actually represents?
I feel like fire, walk with me kind of represents the ability. back to the shadow self to walk with that destructive nature that, theoretically human beings can contain both sides. And I feel like Laura Palmer was kind of the marriage of this. She tried to bring the shadow self into her light self, into her, conscious mind, and unfortunately was pretty much unable to take it because probably of all that kind of rested on her, which was revealed, I feel, in episode 8 of season 3. Um, but I feel like the phrase fire walk with me, I guess it's kind of, a double sided coin there because you can take it to mean, walking with and living with the shadow self,
Mm-hmm.
containing it, or you can take it to mean embodying it and releasing it and, living that kind of on the world. So the destructive and constructive nature of man is kind of how I take it, I suppose.
Just like in season 8 where it starts off with the atom bomb exploding.
Hmm.
That's what my brain's doing right now as you're describing all these brand new theories. So good job.
Thank you.
These are good notions. I've heard a lot of talks about Twin Peaks, and they're not equaling this bar here. So keep it up. You should have a blog about this. Go
I
deeper
just
with it
started a
all.
blog, so
Did you?
I guess maybe that'll be my next post. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, this has
But
been
thank you.
fun.
That's my praise.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So again, I'm talking with Zelia Edgar and her website, her blog, her future book, I hope, is called
Hopefully,
Just
yes.
Another Tinfoil Hat. I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot more of her in the future. And I just really appreciate you coming on and nerding out with me. This was a podcast mainly meant for me. And if other people want to enjoy it, I hope they do. I think that you gave a lot to the audience to think about, and I hope that they download this one and share it.
Well, thank you. And honestly, I was so excited when you mentioned Twin Peaks. I couldn't believe it. So, and again, perfect timing too to tie in with synchronicity. It was
Yeah,
just
and
crazy.
now
So,
is there anything that you want to push before we end here? Any projects you're working on? Anything future
I'm just
schedule wise?
constantly making, yeah, constantly making new YouTube videos. Should have one up by tomorrow on biological UFOs.
Okay,
So that's going to be on my YouTube channel, Just Another Tinfoil Hat. And yeah, I just had an article on the e-magazine Alternate Perceptions called Knit Caps and Coveralls, the issue of UFO occupant clothing. So I'm really excited about that. That's the second article I've ever had in e-print. So
I
I'm
like
really
it.
excited about that. Thank
ET
you.
fashion,
Oh,
breaking
yes.
ground. That's awesome.
Yes. A very
Uh,
often overlooked portion of
all
their
right.
thing.
Enough
Yeah.
of the spandex industry getting all the love. We want to we want to talk about the tartans.
Yes, exactly. So, but yeah, just constantly making new videos. Hopefully, I'll have a podcast coming up
Yeah.
here soon. Really excited about that. So, and then I guess I'm going to co-host with Steve Ward on his podcast, The High Strangeness Factor, at some point coming up here.
Hmm.
So,
Well,
but yeah,
hey,
that's all
you send us
foreseeable
out to
schedule.
break here, and if you could just say, "I will see you in the trees," we will end this broadcast. And I appreciate you being on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You
And
bet.
I will see you in the trees.
Again, that was Zelia Edgar of justanothertinfullhat.com. I absolutely believe you'll be hearing a lot more from her. Someone who is going to snatch her up, broker a deal, convince her to do something, a pilot, a book, a series. I don't know, but I think it's Zelia's strange world, and we're just living in it. Commanded the issues, blew my mind, and that's hard to do, at least harder to do these days, and especially after this weekend. So let's talk about what happened. On December 4th, I get an Al Moon phone call or text, typically a Facebook message with an image or a comment or a sound from property owner Daryl Adams. His name's already out there. You've heard the story. And if not, you can find out more about it. Listen to previous episodes like the initial episode or episode 37 or Strange Familiars episode called Al Moon Echoes or something like that. And so I'm assuming you know the story. Regardless, I went down from Washington to Oregon to an area I'd researched previously in regards to some Sasquatch, typical Sasquatch styled behavior, including trackways leading to a potluck of food that Daryl Adams had been leaving out in the Umpqua National Forest. No game cams, not hunting, just seeing what would happen, what would transpire. And something did transpire. They pulled a track out, a rather large one. I'd say it's about 16 inches, about 5.5 to 6 inches wide, very deep. I think that track was around 3 inches deep and what I would call very hard forest floor. And I was on my way down there. I had some family business, post-Thanksgiving business to take care of. And so I had a 5-hour window, or thereabouts, to go see what had all taken place above the Almoon Lab proper, less than, I'll say, 3 miles from where all the strange happenings occurred. And so with audio in hand and video in hand and plaster in hand, the weirdness ensued. So if you would like to see what transpired, you can do that. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's Strange Brow Radio, BRAU. And it is the last video we just uploaded a couple hours ago on Sunday. I believe today is indeed the 8th of December. So that is available. Excuse my pen dropping. And let me know what you think. We had some strange happenings. Let me just address one of those strange happenings. One of the things that happened while we were on site, just Daryl and I, was there was 3 wood knocks. Now, I cannot tell you how distinct these 3 wood knock sounds were, only to tell you now that they were less than 75 yards. So if you know a football field, take 3/4 of it and take a Louisville slugger in the open forest and hit a piece of dry fir bark as hard as you can. And that's how close this was to both of our backsides on a separate side of a ridge. So I wanted to clear that up. I don't know if that was abundantly clear. Also, a great amount of the editing that happened there. It was kind of a run and gun shoot. So shaky camera footage, good audio. It's 4K video, but no gimbal, no tripod, pouring plaster, collecting hair samples, walking through timber. So a little shaky. The audio's there, and then some of the editing happened on my phone. So typing on a keyboard on your phone, trying to spell out graphics and lay the scene gets a little bit punch drunk as far as the punctuation. So forgive me for all those incidental things. I think we can move on. One thing I can assure you is that these tracks were not made by anyone that we typically know. Let's put it that way. We know of the Bigfoot activity. It seems impossible that someone would have done those wood knocks in broad daylight at 12 o'clock noon, 75 yards away from us on a ridge we just came down from on a nice blue sky day, or the other weirdness that ensued there. So the tracks, in my opinion, because of those 2 very specific things and the 4 or 5 hairs that were grabbed out of there, not to mention these 5 giant footprints about 4 inches deep in the forest floor, I count as being most likely legitimate. If I were to say 1 through 100, I would say, gosh, I'd put them up close to 90%, 95%. Can't just go all the way with this stuff, unfortunately. Didn't see anything yet. Once again, I did leave a little treasure behind, a woven, I guess you'd call it like a woven monocle out of 3 different reeds I found in a wetlands, and hung that near an interesting X-stick structure. So it's got it all. It's got apports or deports. It's got wood knocks. It's got hair samples. Oh my! So if that's how you want to spend your Sunday or your Monday or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, even Saturday, it will be up there in perpetuity. All right, I think that is it. We have our January 4th or 5th Secrets of the Sasquatch. Indeed, that is happening at Manresa Castle in Port Townsend, Washington. And that is going to be on the 4th from 7 to 10 p.m. A free show with researcher Mary Bethune. Go on to strangebrowradio.com to find out more about Mary. Free show. She's just got a lot of interesting paranormal investigations, happenings that she's looked into all these years. And so I'm going to be sitting with her in the castle going over her life's work. And that will be a good thing. Again, that's January 4th at Manresa Castle in Port Townsend, Washington. Book a room. Also a sponsor, manresacastle.com. And one last thing here. Oh, I had mentioned previously that there are some dates that we will be speaking. You can go on to our Facebook page. I'll make sure to put those on strangebrout.com. But mostly, thank you for listening. And if you would like to be a guest or have an encounter of your own, you can do that. Shoot me an email if you don't want to come on out here and talk. You can do that at strangebrowradio@gmail.com. Or if you'd like to be a guest, which is always a good thing for someone doing a podcast, shoot me a Facebook message. You can find me on Strange Brow Radio on Facebook, or just type in Tobe Johnson, Tobe. Or you can shoot me a message at strangebrowradio@gmail.com and tell me your story, and I will call you up, and we will talk about all things unusual. That's the show. I appreciate all the patron members. Remember, you can join Patreon, be a Patreon member, all that good stuff at patreon.com/Strange Brow Radio. Extra content, extra video, and some new cool stuff coming in 2020. And that's it for the show. I will see you in the trees.